Hey everybody, this is Ruby as always, and welcome to episode 2 of our FiveM C# GTA 5 coding adventure. Last time we created some bodyguards, and that's pretty cool, but not a lot of code, only about 30 lines of code, and they only do some kind of basic stuff like protect us and follow us around and stuff like that. So I wanted to move on to something a little cooler, a little more advanced, and we're going to work on a Coroner script today. So basically, this kind of fits into more of like a police RP kind of server. And like if there's a dead body, you could call the coroner, EMS, or something like that. So the reason I chose this is I have some experience making one before for a police RP server that I do some development on. And then it involves a lot of kind of different API calls, and we're going to do a lot of cool stuff with it by the end of it. So it's a good learning experience for a lot of different stuff, and like spawning people and spawning vehicles and making them do stuff, and then triggering events when they're at locations. There's a lot of cool stuff we'll do. So anyways, once we're at Visual Studio, we can go ahead and create a new project. For this one, we're going to create another class library, .NET Framework for C#. And then we'll go ahead and name the project name Client, and then we'll name the solution Summon. And then we'll want to make sure it's .NET Framework 4.5.2, same as last time. And then let's go ahead and create the project. So now that we have the Visual Studio project open, we're going to do much of the same things that we did last time. So let's go ahead and rename class 1 to main. And we'll go ahead and click yes to do a full rename of everything. And we can go ahead and get rid of these imports. Then for our references, let's go ahead and right click and do add reference and browse. And you can always, for example, copy the citizenfx.core.dll from your bodyguard project. You can copy it from here, or if you didn't do that project, you can always go to %, local app data %, then locate FiveM, the app data, citizen, CLR2, lib, mono, 4.5, and then you can grab it and copy it from here, and then go back to your repos folder, summon client, and then we'll paste it here, and then we'll go ahead and add it here. Cool, so all done there, and we can go ahead and click OK. Then we're going to want to click on that again and make sure we don't copy it locally. After that's done, we can go ahead and create some of the properties and edit them as we'll need to. So we'll go ahead and rename this to client.net, and then, whoops, not build event, we'll go to build and do .. output, and then advanced, and we'll change this to embedded. And then we can go ahead and save this, go back to our main, and then we can go ahead and create our public main function here. And in here, basically all we're going to really want to do is register our events. For each of the different summons that we're going to want to create, you want to kind of keep it organized. Obviously, you could do everything in one file, but when it comes to like code maintenance and code readability, you're really going to want to separate everything out. So for now, let's just register all our commands in here. So we'll use API register command, and then we'll have to obviously import that. And then of course we're missing our base inheritance for everything. So let's go ahead and add that here. Show potential fixes, and go ahead and add that in there. And then now we can go ahead and do show potential fixes here and do that for that one. So for this, let's go ahead and you can name this command whatever you'd like. We can name it, for example, the first one we're going to do is coroner, and then the next thing we'll do is a new action, and we'll make a new function right here, and then false for this last parameter. And for new action, let's go ahead and using system, and then this summon coroner function we'll have to create here. So let's go ahead and go below here, and we'll actually create this. So it doesn't actually need to be public, so we'll make it private void summon coroner, because it can be private because we're actually not going to be using it outside of this class. So in here, we will do any kind of logic we need to when we come to summon a coroner, but for now we'll leave this blank because we actually need to create a new class over here. So we'll right click on client and go to add class, and you'll want to change this to whatever you're creating. So for us, that would be a coroner, and we'll go ahead and add. And once you're in here, you don't need to set up any kind of inheritance for this. You can just leave this as is. But within our coroner class, we need to go ahead and create a function to do the summon event. So for this, we want to make sure it's public, and we'll do a static void of summon, except don't screw up the capitalization like I did. And we'll go ahead and create this. And then once we're in here, we're going to want to start doing all of our different summoning actions. So one sec, we'll go back to main, and let's go ahead and add that here. So if we type coroner, you can actually see it pop down there, and then we can do our .summon. So now when we execute the command /coroner, it'll trigger this summon coroner function, which will then call the function from the main class. So now that we're back into here, we can start to actually write the code. So one of the things we'll need is the player itself. So we'll go ahead and do that for game, and then player character, and show potential fixes using citizenfx.core. Let's go ahead and clean up these unneeded ones. And now that we're here, one thing we can do just so that people know that the coroner is coming is we can show them a notification. So to do that, you'll want to use screen.show notification, and let's go ahead and show potential fixes using the UI. And then this wants a message and if it's blinking or not. So for this, we just want to pass it a string message. So we can say the coroner is on his way to you now, and we'll say that. So after this is done, we obviously need to start actually making the event happen. So for this event, if you kind of think about it, you're going to need maybe like a driver, an assistant, the van or whatever car they're going to drive to the scene. And then there's a bunch of configuration of like, where are they going to go? Where are they going to spawn from? So the first thing we want to probably do is create the van. So we'll make a comment here for van. And there's a couple different ways that you could do this. For example, you could take the player position and do a forward vector and right vector and put them off away from the player. But there's an API command available that will get you the closest road within a certain amount. So for example, that one would be, we'll do API, and then let's go ahead and do the fix for it. And then in here is a function called getInth, which is basically get this number. You'll see this will always be like, you can pass it 1, 2, 3, 4, 50, 75, 100, however far you really want them to spawn away from you. And you'll see the vehicle node, but we want to get the nth closest vehicle node with heading, this one here. So this one has quite a few parameters, but the first 3 that it wants is the position. So this is going to be from this position, what is the closest one. So for this, we want to choose the player's position, and then the X, Y, and Z coordinates. And then the next thing it needs is an int of nth closest. So if you choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they will be probably like only right down the road from you, which wouldn't be very realistic for this. Obviously, the coroner is never going to be right down the road from you. So you want to spawn him quite a bit away. So usually something within like 75 to 100 works here pretty well, in my opinion. The next thing it wants is a reference of a vector 3 of out position. So this is something we really haven't worked with yet with a reference variable, which basically just means you need to pass this a reference of this variable. So for example, this wanted, it was a vector 3. So we'll create a vector 3 of, we'll say spawn location, and we'll go ahead and put that there. But now if let's go ahead and add this here, and it will still give you an error because if you notice, you can't pass it an unassigned local variable. So for this, you can fix this by either, for example, you could assign it to the position of the player, or you could just make it a blank one and just do new vector 3, and that's perfectly fine. So moving on with the next one, the next thing it wants is a ref float of the heading. So much like this one will create a float of spawn heading, and this will be the direction on the road that they're facing. And for this, we can just make it equal to 0f is fine. So we'll pass this variable here as well. And then the next thing that it wants is a bunch of unknown variables. So these aren't very helpful. Obviously, you're not going to know what these are. So let's go reference the actual native documentation. So I'll copy this function name, and I'll go ahead and paste it here. There we go. So as we can see, there's quite a bit of documentation about it. And basically, these guys are just passing some of the different parameters that the game always seems to pass to it. So we will go ahead and do that. So if we can do 9, 3, and 2.5, and then I know that unknown 1 should be 0, just from my experience. So for this, let's go ahead and create a new int, because this first one is actually a reference variable. So we need to create this guy here. And let's go ahead and pass them there. And then the next one that it wants was unknown 2, which was 9. Then the next one that it wants is unknown 3, which they were saying was a float of 3. And the last one is a float of 2.5. And there we go. So one thing we forgot is to actually add the ref keywords here. We'll just add those in here. And then this is now a valid function. So what this actually returns, if we take a look at it, is it just returns a bool of true or false. So we don't actually have to capture the output of this function. We could to determine if it failed or not, but this isn't really a function that's going to fail, so we don't have to worry too much about it. But what it will do is it will spawn, it will assign, not spawn, this spawn location and spawn heading into these variables here, so that we can then access them right after this function. So what we'll need to do next is maybe create the vehicle, because at this location is where we're going to spawn the coroner's vehicle. So one thing we'll need to do is go ahead and create it. So we're going to make a new variable called FiveM entity, and we're going to make this equal to await. And much like our create ped from last time, there's a create vehicle. And you can pass this a model, which can be like a name of like a string. Like you could, for example, pass it, except spell it right, obviously, like burrito3. Or what you can do is pass it a vehicle hash of burrito. And we want burrito3. That's the kind of plain van that spawns within GTA 5. The next parameter that it wants is a vector3 of the position. So we'll pass this spawn location, and then the last optional parameter is the heading. So we'll spawn this as spawn heading and go ahead and do that. One thing this is going to complain about is because we can only use await within an async method. So it's pretty simple. All you have to do is come up here to your summon function, add async to it. And then the next thing we actually need to do is create this variable for our entire class. The reason we want to save this into the class as a class variable and a class property, I guess you could say, is that we want to use this different integer throughout the script. Right now we don't really need to use it, but later on, like say when we want to clean up this coroner, like when they're not needed anymore, we're going to need to know who they are, and we don't want to keep some long running loop running to wait until then when we can just store it and use it later. So for here, we'll go ahead and create a private static of vehicle, because this actually will return a vehicle. If we look at this, it returns a vehicle. So this will need to be a vehicle, and we'll call this FiveM entity here. So now this is all good. So after that's done, the vehicle will be created, and it will create it at that location. So depending on however it spawns, it could be anything. So something else that we can do with vehicles, and we haven't really got a chance to do yet, is some different mods. So depending on what you want to do, you can set like the turbo or the color. You can set license plates, for example. So that's what we'll take a look at real quick. So FiveM entity, and then if you look through, there's all different kinds of methods available to you, but we're looking for one just called mods. And then if you look in here, you can see all the different kinds of mods that you can do to it. So for us, let's take a look at the primary color, and then what you want to go ahead and open this up not as a function but as a value, and you can pass it the vehicle color hash, and then we'll do metallic black, for example, would be good. Go ahead and end that line there, and CVAN entity, and then we can also, for example, set it to like a SA exempt plate, since this would be kind of like a government plate plated vehicle. So you can set the license plate as well, and you can set this to anything you want, like SAC or SA Coroner. If you want it to look a little more realistic, you can always use a $sign before the variable and then assign it maybe like a random number. So we'll do this, and then you can open up a curly bracket, and in here you can put any kind of variable. For us, I want to use the random library. So we haven't added this yet, but let's go ahead and type it out, and then we want to do a next of 10. So for random, this is going to be something else that we'll probably reuse throughout the script quite a few times. So instead of making a new random instance in every single function, we'll just create a global one that the entire class can use. So for this one, we're also going to assign read-only. That's something we haven't seen before. That's because this random one, we don't actually want to ever assign anything to it. We only ever want to get values from it. So it kind of prevents you from doing anything kind of funky like that. So we'll go ahead and import random like it said, and then we can close this off at the end. So random.next, you can pass it this, and this is just the max value. So you could set this to like this, and it would generate, but I really doubt there's that many corners in San Andreas. So 10 is a pretty good number. So then now that we've set the license plate, you can also set the style of the license plate. So let's take a look at this, and license plate style. And in here you can do license plate style. It's got one available for you, and the one we're going to want is blue on white 3. That's the SA exempt one. So after that's done, we've got the vehicle created, we've got it black, but there's nobody in it, and we also are never going to know where it's at. So one thing we could do, and it kind of helps people know where the different entities are within the world, is we can create a blip for him. So we'll create another line here for van blip, and we're going to create a new variable for cvan blip, and this is going to be equal to API. Then we're going to add blip for entity. So this one just takes an int of an entity. So for this, we're going to want to pass our cvan entity.handle. And then let's go ahead and create this variable up here. So for this one, we're going to want to create a private static int of cvan blip, because this just returns an integer in the end. So anyways, now that we have the blip created, if you just left it like this, it would be a red blip and it would say enemy. The corner is not really our enemy, so there's some extra configuration for the blip that we'll need to do. So one of the ones we'll want to do is maybe color the blip differently. So we can set blip color, and make sure you do the British spelling for color. And then it wants the blip, so we'll call cvan blip, which is our stored variable for it, and then the int of color. So I don't really know these offhand, so we'll copy this function again, and let's go to the native documentation. And in here they have all the different colors listed. So this dark gray looks pretty good. Let's go with that one. Let's go back to Visual Studio, and let's set this to 40 and end the line. So now we have the blip, it's colored, but it will still say enemy on it. So let's go ahead, and there's another one we'll do, begin text command set blip name. That's a mouthful, I'll tell you that much. So in here, this is a little confusing, but you just want to set this to string. Then this next one is add text component string. And then this is going to be whatever you want the blip to say. So it could be coroner, or enemy, or bodyguard, like if you wanted to go back and add blips to the bodyguards. For this, we'll just set it to coroner. And then the last thing we need for the blip is to end this command so it knows we're done with it. Set blip name, and then it'll go ahead and actually assign this text component to this actual blip. So in here, we'll call blip again and end that off. So now we have the van, we've got the blip created. So next, let's go ahead and create the driver. So we'll go ahead and make a new section for driver. And what we're going to want to go ahead and do is load the model. So what we can do is we can go ahead and create this new load function. And we'll go ahead and create a public static async task bool of load model and uint model. And within here we can go ahead and start to do our different requests. So let's go ahead and import system threading task, and within here we can go ahead and call API dot request model, and you can do that. And then we'll do kind of the same thing we did as last time. So while API has model loaded, and then call model again, go ahead and do this, then debug.writeLine, waiting for model to load. And then we'll await base script.delay 100 milliseconds, so that until it actually loads this model, it will wait every 100 milliseconds. And then we'll just return true. And this is all good. So something else you could do also is detect if this is a valid model if you wanted. So if API and then is model in CD image, probably a little bit of some legacy code function there, because well, I guess GTA 5 probably came out on CDs too, but I guess everybody's used to digital downloads these days. So you could always write debug writeLine invalid model. Whoops, we got to add our $sign at the beginning to let us inject a variable into the string. So invalid model was supplied to load model, for example. I got to get a new keyboard, my shift key. And then you want to return false, because you don't actually want it to do it, because if it's an invalid model that doesn't exist, this code will just load infinitely. So you always want to kind of be careful with that kind of stuff. So one thing we can do actually is you usually won't run into loading issues with vehicles, but it can happen if it's not like a common one, is we can go ahead and throw this before our van. So we'll go ahead and do uint vehicle hash dot burrito3, and this will make sure that the actual vehicle gets loaded before. So in here we'll do the same thing before we spawn the actual pedestrian. So we'll do uint again, ped hash, and then I've already kind of done some research on a good pedestrian that would look good for here. So there's a doctor, for example, that works really well for this. So we'll go ahead and load model uint ped hash doctor 01.smmm. And you could also always just do everything in string notations, but I always find that doing everything through the different hashes always kind of makes everything look better, in my opinion. So now that we have the pedestrian loaded, we can go ahead and actually create him. So we'll go ahead and create a new variable again, and we'll call him cvan ped1, for example. Let's go ahead and then do our await, and much like we did the last one, we'll do create ped, and in here you can pass the ped hash of doctor, and then the next thing that it wants is the position where it should spawn them. So let's just set this to the spawn location of where it's going to spawn the van, and we'll go ahead and create this new variable up here. So we'll create a private static ped of cvan ped1, and then just to save us some time, because we know we're going to have a co-driver, let's go ahead and create cvan ped2. So down here, now that we have him created, we have him stored, we for one need to actually put him into the vehicle, and we will then also need to eventually give him a location to drive to, since he's the driver. So there is a function available. If you look here, you can actually set into vehicle from the ped himself. There's also, of course, other native functions that you can do to do this for you. So the things that it wants is a vehicle of vehicles. So we have that stored, luckily, cvan entity, and then it wants the vehicle seat. So we can do vehicle seat and then driver, for example, for this guy. So now that we actually have him set into the vehicle, we can do a couple other things. For example, one thing you can do is so that he can't be targeted by the player. This kind of prevents maybe somebody from making him angry. But there's a lot of other things that you can do to kind of prevent that too. So the next guy we'll create is the passenger. So we'll do await load model, and then do our uint, and then ped hash, and then there's a scientist model that works pretty well for this. Then cvan ped2. We'll go ahead and create the second ped hash scientist, and then we can spawn him at the same location, and then cvan ped2, set him into the vehicle of cvan entity and vehicle seat dot passenger, because he's going to be the passenger in the vehicle. And then we can also always set him to can be targeted false as well. And then they're all set. So other than that, so they now have a spawn location. We've spawned the actual pedestrians in the vehicle. They're in the vehicle. Now they need to know where to actually drive to. So you could always make them just drive to the player location if you wanted to, but you'll kind of run into some issues, like what if the player is off the road? What if they are behind some cars? So typically what you'll want to do is you can use a function very similar to the one that we used to spawn the vehicle, but instead of nth, we can just get closest vehicle node. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll make a new one for some configuration, and let's go ahead and call api.get closest vehicle node with heading. So let's see, we want to get this first one right here because we don't want to do nth. You could always do that one again and just call 0 or 1 or whatever you really want to. But this is maybe a little bit of a cleaner way to do it. Except spell position right. Player dot position dot y, player dot position dot z, and then once again we have to make up some reference variables. So let's go ahead and create this new line here, and we will do a vector 3 of, let's say, target location, and we'll go ahead and make it a new vector 3. Alright, so it wants target location, and then the next thing it wants is another heading. So let's do float of target heading equals 0f. And then let's not forget our ref keywords this time. And then what is the next variable that it wants? Node type. So not too sure what that could mean. There's a couple different ints that you can pass to it, but whenever you're not sure, I always just reference this because most of the time people kind of have some feedback on how everything works. So see, this one has the node type and then some other options to it. So P6 and P7, for example. So this guy right here says P6 is always 3, P7 is always 0, and then let's see, there's all the different road types here. So we can probably just choose 1 and everything will be fine. So let's go back to Visual Studio. If we come out here, we'll do 1 for that node type, and then it said 3 and 0 as the other parameters. So we'll go ahead and save those there. So after this is done, now our target location will be filled out. So one thing we can go ahead and do is we can access the task option of the driver. So that's cvan ped1 task, and then the one we're looking for is drive to. So drive to takes a vehicle. So this also could mean that you could also spawn him outside it and he could get into it and drive it away. I've used this before for like an event where you have a pedestrian outside a vehicle, and when you drive up close to him, you want him to run away. Well, this is something else you could do it to him. You could use with them, and they would then run to the vehicle, and drive it away. So the vehicle here is, of course, the van that they're already in, so they don't have to run anywhere. And then they want a vector 3 for the target. So we'll pass target location, then the radius. So this is how far away from that position is okay for them to stop. So we can pass it like 10f here. That'd be about 10 meters. And then the speed, this is how fast they'll drive there. If you set it to 1F, they'll be like a turtle, but usually around like 10 or something like that. It's like a normal speed, I think, and then 20 is kind of like a quicker speed. So then there's driving style. So this is kind of it looks very different at first, but it's basically a bunch of flags that you can set. So I'll link a website down in the description where you can actually generate different driving styles. And like, for example, if you don't want them to wait at red lights, or you do want them to wait at red lights, you can configure all that. So one that I've already generated is 262972. This one seems to work pretty well, and I think I've even seen other people use this one in code before. So after we have them all set to drive to, the last thing we'll actually need to do is trigger some kind of value in our code that we know the event's been spawned. It's not very useful right now, but for the next part of this video, where we're going to make them actually do stuff once they're at a location, we're going to need to know if the event is spawned, you know, if they're out of the vehicle, if they're in the middle of doing an action, stuff like that. So we'll go ahead and set event spawn to true, and then we'll need to actually create this variable up here. So this one, you can do a private static bool and save it here. And that is pretty much it. So let's just go over the code. We have our van spawned. We are doing our model loading for everybody. We have our van created. We have our van modified. Then we have our blip created and named and colored appropriately. Then we're creating our driver, setting him into the vehicle. Then we have our passenger, setting him into the vehicle. Then we're coming up with where we want the driver to drive to. And then we're assigning the task of drive to the driver to actually go to that location. So now that this is done, you can actually go ahead and run this code. So let's go ahead and save everything. And we've got everything filled out. So we'll come back to here, we'll save this, and let's go ahead and save this. And the next thing we'll need to do is import our resource.lua file again. So let's go ahead and do add existing item. And then let's come to the desktop or wherever you have it saved and set this to all files. Let's go ahead and copy this guy, and let's go back to our summon repo, and we'll paste him here. And let's go ahead and add him, and then output to, or copy to output directory, and we'll do copy always, and we should be good. So now we can go ahead and build. Let's see if there's any problems with our code. Hopefully not. It's always the most kind of nerve-wracking part, but it looks like we're good. Other than it's complaining that this value is never used, and that's just because we're not using it in any kind of main function. I guess it doesn't realize we are using it, but we're not, and it's opinion. So now that we have this generated, we can go ahead and create our new folder in our server for this. So you'll want to navigate to wherever you have FX Server installed. So on here I have it in CFX Server, Resources, and then let's go ahead and create a new folder, and we'll name this Summon. And then let's go ahead and create another Explorer window, and we'll go to our repos folder. And if you don't know where that's at, it would be C users admin, and then you'll see source repos, and then here will be your repos. So we'll do summon output, and then you can control C, control V, and if you have it named client.net.dll, this resource.lua will work fine. If you don't, you'll have to edit it and set it to whatever you have your actual client script set as. So now that that's done, let's go ahead and start the server, and let's get into game and try it out. Alright, so now that we're in game, we can go ahead and test everything out. So I'll go ahead and open up the chat menu, type /coroner, and we see our message. A coroner is on his way to you now. And we can see him, he kind of spawned kind of far away. Maybe 80's a little too far. But you can actually see him coming down the road. We can see our name applied to him and everything, Coroner. He should be coming up right now. There he is. And then he should be stopping, yep, somewhere right here. So pretty close to the player. And then kind of the part we're missing now is what happens after they get here. So I don't want to make these videos too terribly long. Like, I believe if we had to do the rest of the logic, it would be like an 1.5-hour video. So I'm going to split this one up into 2 parts, and hopefully that's all. And on the next video, we'll actually cover all the logic after they get to you. So them finding bodies and doing all the different kinds of logic that we'll have to work on for that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Sorry it's got to be a two-parter, but I just don't want it to be too much of a knowledge overload in one video. So let me know what you guys thought. Let me know what y'all think y'all would like to see, because I'm very open to making some of the plugins that you guys think about. I know somebody's already suggested one, which was a really good idea, and it'll be a really detailed video for probably later on in the series, because it's going to kind of be a little harder at the beginning. So anyways, I've blabbered on long enough. I really hope you guys have enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.